There's a specific kind of silence that falls over a first-class cabin when the unspoken rules of privilege are challenged. It's heavy, suffocating, and dripping with judgment. When 23-year-old Maya handed over her golden ticket at Gate 42, she didn't just step onto a plane, she stepped into a battleground of prejudice. They looked at her skin, her youth, her oversized collegiate hoodie, and instantly decided she didn't belong. The gate agents sneered, the flight attendants conspired, and entitled passengers laughed. But they made one catastrophic mistake in their blind arrogance. They didn't know who her father was. And by the time the secure phone in the cockpit rang, it was already entirely too late for apologies. John F. Kennedy International Airport was a chaotic symphony of rolling luggage, frantic announcements, and the dull roar of thousands of travelers rushing to their destinations. It was a Tuesday evening, the prime time for transatlantic business flights, and Terminal 4 was packed with suits, briefcases, and the palpable tension of corporate schedules. Maya Reynolds stood near the sprawling windows of Gate 42, watching the massive Boeing 777-300ER being prepped for the long-haul flight to London Heathrow. Atlantic Global Airways, Flight 882. It was a route her father knew like the back of his hand. Maya was 23, a recent graduate from MIT with a master's degree in aeronautical engineering, and she was exhausted. She had spent the last 48 hours finalizing a grueling project presentation and just wanted to sink into the lie-flat pod of Seat 2A, watch a mediocre movie, and sleep over the Atlantic. She was dressed comfortably for the 7-hour journey, a pair of high-end but understated black joggers, pristine white sneakers, and an oversized grey Stanford hoodie she'd stolen from her older brother years ago. Her natural hair was pulled back into a neat, curly puff. To anyone paying attention, she was just a tired traveller. To Brenda, the senior gate agent currently manning the priority boarding scanner, she was an anomaly that needed correcting. Atlantic Global Airways would now like to invite our Diamond Medallion members and passengers ticketed in Global First Class to board through the priority lane. Brenda's voice echoed through the PA system, clipped and mechanically polite. Maya picked up her leather carry-on duffel, slung her backpack over her shoulder, and walked toward the blue-carpeted priority lane. She was the first one there, simply because she had been standing closest to the desk. As she approached the scanner, boarding pass pulled up on her phone, Brenda stepped sideways, physically blocking the small entryway. Brenda was a woman in her late 50s, her uniform impeccable, her name tag gleaming, and her eyes sharp with an immediate, calculating dismissal. "Excuse me, miss," Brenda said, her voice dropping the customer service chair and adopting the tone of a tired school teacher addressing a lost child. "This lane is for first class and Diamond members only. Main cabin boarding will begin in about 20 minutes. You need to step aside." Maya stopped, mildly annoyed, but used to this specific brand of microaggression. It wasn't the first time someone had assumed she was in the wrong line. "I know," Maya said, her voice calm and even. "I'm flying first class." She held out her phone, the screen brightly displaying the digital boarding pass. Maya Reynolds, Seat 2A, Global First. Brenda didn't even look at the phone. She looked over Maya's shoulder. "Miss, I'm going to have to ask you to clear the lane. You are blocking our premium passengers." Behind Maya, a loud theatrical sigh erupted. A man in a tailored charcoal suit, carrying a Toomey briefcase, had walked up behind her. His name was Richard Sterling, a mid-level executive who treated his frequent flyer status like a minor knighthood. "Is there a problem here?" Richard asked, his voice dripping with condescension. He looked Maya up and down, his eyes lingering on her hoodie and sneakers with clear disdain. "Some of us have a schedule to keep, sweetheart. Economy is over there." Maya felt the familiar, hot prickle of anger at the base of her neck, but she forced a polite smile. She had been raised better than to lose her temper in public, especially in an airport. I'm not in economy, Maya said, turning slightly to address him before turning back to the gate agent. Brenda, please scan my pass so I can board. Brenda finally looked down at the phone. She squinted at the screen, her frown deepening. She didn't reach for the scanner gun. Instead, she typed something aggressively into her keyboard. Reynolds, she muttered. Let me see your physical ID. Maya pulled out her driver's license and handed it over. Brenda examined it, as if she were inspecting a forgery. She held it up to the light, looked at Maya, and looked back at the card. It's a fully paid ticket, Maya added, trying to expedite the process. Did you purchase this ticket yourself? Brenda asked, her tone accusatory. Or is this an employee buddy pass? Because if you are flying non-rev, there is a strict dress code for the premium cabin, and sweatpants do not qualify. They are not sweatpants, and it's not a buddy pass, Maya replied, her voice dropping a fraction of an octave, the steel in her tone finally showing. It is a revenue ticket. Scan the barcode, Brenda. Richard scoffed loudly from behind. Unbelievable. They hand out upgrades to just anyone these days. This used to be a premium airline. Brenda finally scanned the phone. The machine let out a loud, cheerful beep, flashing green. The system had accepted it. The ticket was perfectly valid. Brenda looked genuinely disappointed. She thrust the ID back at Maya. Proceed down the jet bridge, she snapped, not offering the standard, have a great flight, she reserved for the businessman. Have a lovely evening, Brenda, Maya said sweetly, grabbing her bags. As she walked past the desk, she heard Richard step up to the scanner. Good evening, Mr. Sterling. Welcome back, Brenda cooed, her voice practically dripping with honey. So sorry for the delay. You know how it is when people don't know how the boarding process works. Maya gripped the handle of her bag tighter and walked down the sloping tunnel toward the aircraft. The battle at the gate was over, but the war for her seat was just beginning. The jet bridge smelled faintly of jet fuel and industrial carpet cleaner. As Maya walked down the steep incline, the adrenaline from the encounter with Brenda began to fade, replaced by a deep, weary frustration. She hated that she had to brace herself just to get on an airplane. She hated that her mere existence in a luxury space was treated as a suspicious event. At the end of the tunnel, the massive doorway of the Boeing 777 loomed. Standing at the threshold, welcoming passengers, was Cynthia, the chief purser. Cynthia was a veteran flight attendant. She wore the navy blue Atlantic global uniform with the kind of rigid perfection that suggested she ironed it while wearing it. Her blonde hair was pulled into a severe French twist, and her smile was a practiced, plastic curve that never reached her cold blue eyes. As Maya stepped onto the aircraft, Cynthia's practiced smile vanished. Her eyes darted from Maya's face to her hoodie, to her sneakers. Cynthia immediately stepped forward, placing herself squarely in the middle of the aisle, turning her body to block the entrance to the first-class cabin to the left. Boarding pass, Cynthia demanded. She didn't say, welcome aboard or good evening. It was an order, blunt and authoritative. Maya held up her phone again. Seat 2A. Cynthia didn't step aside. She reached out and grabbed Maya's wrist, not hard, but firmly enough to pull the phone closer to her face. Maya immediately snatched her hand back, her eyes flashing. Do not grab me, Maya said, her voice low but dangerous. Cynthia looked momentarily taken aback, but quickly recovered, her expression hardening into a glare. I need to verify your seat assignment. The main cabin is to your right, down the second aisle. I am aware of where the main cabin is, Maya said, maintaining eye contact. But my seat is 2A, which is to the left. There must be a mistake, Cynthia said smoothly, crossing her arms over her chest. Seat 2A is a premium suite. Let me see the boarding pass again. You just saw it, Maya said. Before Cynthia could respond, Heavy footsteps echoed on the metal floor of the jet bridge. Richard Sterling appeared, his rolling briefcase gliding smoothly behind him. "Excuse me, ladies," Richard said, flashing a charming, conspiratorial smile at Cynthia. "Some of us are trying to get settled." Cynthia's demeanor transformed instantly. The ice melted into immediate servitude. "Mr. Sterling, it is an absolute pleasure to have you flying with us again. Let me take your coat. You're in 2B today. Right this way." Cynthia finally stepped aside, but only to usher Richard into the first-class cabin. Richard brushed past Maya, intentionally bumping her shoulder with his garment bag as he passed. "Watch it," he muttered under his breath. Maya took a deep breath, counted to 3, and turned left, following Richard into the cabin. The Global First cabin was a haven of modern luxury. There were only 8 suites, each featuring high-walled privacy partitions, wide leather seats, and massive entertainment screens. The lighting was a soft, ambient purple. It was designed to be an oasis of calm. Maya found her suite, 2A, right across the aisle from Richard's seat in 2B. She stowed her duffel bag in the overhead bin, keeping her backpack, and slid into the plush leather seat. She let out a long sigh, sinking into the cushions. She just needed the doors to close. She just needed to put her noise-cancelling headphones on and block out the world. A minute later, Cynthia appeared in the aisle holding a silver tray with crystal champagne flutes. She approached Richard first. "Welcome back, Mr. Sterling. A glass of Laurent Perrier before takeoff." "Thank you, Cynthia." "Much appreciated," Richard said, taking the glass. He leaned back, eyeing Maya across the aisle with an amused, mocking expression. Cynthia moved past Maya's suite without a glance, proceeding to offer champagne to the older white couple in seats 1A and 1B. Maya sat there, her hands folded in her lap, watching the blatant exclusion. It was petty, but it was a clear message. You are not one of us. You are tolerated, but you are not welcome. Maya didn't want the champagne, but the principle of the matter gnawed at her. She reached up and pressed the flight attendant call button. A soft chime rang out through the cabin. Cynthia, who was standing just 2 suites down, slowly turned around. She walked back to Maya's suite, her posture rigid, looking down her nose. "Yes?" Cynthia asked, her voice tight. "I didn't receive a pre-departure beverage," Maya said politely. "I'll take a sparkling water with lemon, please." Cynthia sighed, a loud, exaggerated exhalation. "I am currently serving our premium passengers, miss. When I have a moment, I will see what I can do. We are very busy prepping the galley for an on-time departure." "I am a premium passenger," Maya reminded her. "Water," Cynthia said dismissively. "I'll get to it." Cynthia spun on her heel and walked away. Across the aisle, Richard chuckled softly, taking a slow sip of his champagne. "You know," Richard said, leaning slightly toward Maya's suite, his voice carrying easily across the narrow aisle. "If you make a fuss, they can just take you off the plane. The crew has full authority to remove disruptive passengers. And you're starting to look very disruptive." Maya turned her head slowly to look at him. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't show anger. She just stared at him with an icy intellectual detachment that made him visibly uncomfortable. "I am drinking a glass of water, Mr. Sterling," Maya said softly. "If my existence disrupts you, that sounds like a personal psychological issue, not an aviation one." Richard's face flushed red. He opened his mouth to snap back, but Cynthia reappeared. She wasn't carrying water. She was carrying a printed manifest and a handheld radio, and she looked victorious. "Miss Reynolds," Cynthia said, stepping into the opening of Maya's suite. Her voice was louder now, intentionally projecting so the rest of the cabin could hear. Several passengers turned their heads. "Where's my water?" Maya asked. "There has been a ticketing error," Cynthia announced, ignoring the question. Your reservation in seat 2A is invalid. The system shows that this seat was blocked for maintenance, and you were incorrectly upgraded due to a computer glitch at the gate. Maya stared at her. It was a lie, and a flimsy one at that. Blocked for maintenance, Maya echoed. She patted the leather armrests, pressed the button to recline the seat slightly, and tapped the functioning touch screen. Everything seems to be working perfectly, and I wasn't upgraded. I bought this ticket. I don't have time to argue with you, Cynthia said, her tone escalating from passive-aggressive to openly hostile. Gate Agent Brenda just sent a message to my tablet. We need to clear this seat immediately. We have a seat for you in row 42, which is an aisle seat in the main cabin. I suggest you gather your belongings and move back there now, before I have to call airport security. Richard leaned over, grinning. Looks like the glitch has been fixed. Better head to the back, sweetheart. Don't make them drag you off. Maya felt her heart rate spike. She knew exactly what was happening. They were banking on her being intimidated. They were banking on her causing a scene, yelling, or becoming the angry black woman stereotype so they would have a legitimate excuse to call the Port Authority police and have her removed from the flight entirely. It was a power play, orchestrated by a gate agent and a flight attendant whose biases had fully overridden their professional judgment. But Maya was not just any 23-year-old. She was Maya Reynolds. She took a slow, deep breath, maintaining absolute eye contact with Cynthia. Cynthia, Maya said, her voice dropping to a conversational, almost chillingly calm whisper. My ticket is a full-fare, revenue class F ticket. I paid for it with my own American Express. There is no maintenance issue with this seat. You are fabricating a reason to downgrade me, because you and Brenda have decided, based on my appearance, that I do not belong in your cabin. How dare you accuse me of discrimination? Cynthia gasped, pressing a hand to her chest in mock offense. I am following protocol. You are being belligerent and uncooperative. I am giving you a direct order from the flight crew. Move to row 42, or you will be removed from this aircraft. I am not moving, Maya said simply. She settled back into her seat and crossed her legs. Fine, Cynthia snapped, her face turning an ugly shade of magenta. I'm going to speak with the captain. You've just cost yourself a flight, little girl. Cynthia stormed off toward the forward galley, grabbing the intercom phone to call the gate and demanding they send a customer service supervisor and a security officer to the aircraft. Maya sat in the tense silence of the cabin. The other passengers were whispering. Richard was glaring at her, shaking his head. Disgraceful, he muttered. Maya didn't panic. She reached into her pocket, pulled out her phone, and opened her messages. She clicked on a pinned contact. Contact name, Dad, personal. Her father, Arthur Reynolds, wasn't just a frequent flyer. Before moving into the corporate suite, Arthur had been an Air Force fighter pilot, then a senior captain for Atlantic Global Airways for 20 years. Now, he was the executive vice president of global flight operations for the entire airline. He oversaw every pilot, every flight attendant protocol, and every operational standard for a fleet of over 400 aircraft. He practically wrote the manual Cynthia was currently ignoring. Maya quickly typed out a text. Maya, hey Dad, on Flight 882 to LHR. Still at the gate, Chief Purser, Cynthia and Gate Agent Brenda are actively trying to forcibly downgrade me to economy or kick me off the plane because they don't believe I bought a first-class ticket. Refusing service. Fabricating maintenance issues with Seat 2A. They're calling security right now. She hit send. The response was almost instantaneous. 3 dots appeared, danced for a second, and vanished. Dad. I'm in my office. Give me 60 seconds. Up at the very front of the aircraft, behind the reinforced, bulletproof cockpit door, Captain David Harris and First Officer Thomas were going through the final pre-flight checklist. The flight computers were loaded, the fuel was signed off, and they were just waiting for the final passenger count to push back from the gate. David was a seasoned pilot, a man who loved flying and hated administrative drama. He was in the middle of checking the hydraulic pressure indicators when the secure satellite communication system, the ACARS data link, usually reserved for dispatch and critical weather updates, chimed with an urgent message alert. A moment later, the dedicated priority company radio line buzzed loudly. It wasn't dispatch. It was the direct line from the Executive Operational Command Center in Chicago. David frowned and picked up the headset. Flight 882, Captain Harris, speaking. David. A deep, booming, and dangerously calm voice crackled over the headset. It's Arthur Reynolds. Captain Harris straightened up in his seat instantly. The Vice President of Flight Operations did not call individual aircraft cockpits 5 minutes before pushback, unless something catastrophic was happening. Sir, David said, his tone turning completely professional. What can I do for you? David, look at your passenger manifest. Arthur's voice was like grinding stone. Seat 2A. Tell me the name. David tapped his iPad, pulling up the first-class manifest. Reynolds. Maya. Wait, Arthur, is that... That is my daughter, David, Arthur said. And according to her, your chief purser and the gate agent are currently threatening to have her dragged off the aircraft by security because they don't believe a young black woman can afford a fully paid revenue first-class seat. David felt the blood drain from his face. He looked out the cockpit window at the terminal, then back at the reinforced door behind him. Sir, I was unaware. The purser hasn't notified me of any disturbance in the cabin. She's on her way to tell you she has a belligerent passenger, Arthur said, his voice dripping with venom. I want you to step out of that cockpit, David. I want you to go into that cabin. You will identify my daughter. You will assure her that her seat is secure. And then you will tell Purser Cynthia and Gate Agent Brenda that they have exactly 2 minutes to pack their bags and step off my airplane because they are suspended pending immediate termination. Understood, sir, Captain Harris said, unbuckling his shoulder harness with rapid, practiced movements. And David, Arthur added softly, the threat hanging heavy in the static. Make it public. Inside the cramped, digitized sanctuary of the flight deck, Captain David Harris felt a cold sweat prickle the back of his neck. He had flown through Category 4 hurricanes, executed blind instrument landings in blinding fog, and handled dual-engine flameouts in simulators without his heart rate breaking 80 beats per minute. But the chilling, absolute authority in Arthur Reynolds's voice over the comms was far more terrifying than any mechanical failure. Arthur Reynolds wasn't just a boss, he was an aviation legend. He was the man who had single-handedly overhauled Atlantic Global's safety culture. He was notoriously fair, but he possessed a zero-tolerance policy for incompetence and an absolute, scorched-earth policy for bigotry. Thomas, Captain Harris barked to his first officer, his voice tight. Take the comms. Hold our pushback clearance. Do not let ground control move this aircraft an inch until I get back. Thomas, a younger pilot who had been half listening to the one-sided conversation, blinked in surprise. Captain, we're T-minus 4 minutes to slot. If we lose our window, if we don't handle this right now, we won't have jobs tomorrow, David interrupted, unlatching the heavy, reinforced cockpit door. Keep the engines spooled down. Just outside the cockpit, in the forward galley, Chief Purser Cynthia was aggressively jabbing the buttons on the interphone, trying to connect to the gate podium. She had her back to the cockpit door, completely unaware of the storm brewing just inches behind her. Brenda, it's Cynthia, she hissed into the receiver. Yes, the girl in 2A. She's refusing to move. She's becoming hostile. We need Port Authority officers down here right now. She's a security risk. I'm about to brief the captain so he can authorize the removal." David pushed the heavy cockpit door open. It clicked loudly, the sound echoing in the small galley space. Cynthia spun around, startled, but quickly plastering on an expression of grave professional concern. She hung up the interphone. "Captain Harris," Cynthia said, her voice dropping to a serious, conspiratorial whisper. "I'm so sorry to delay our departure, but we have a situation in Global First. A passenger in seat 2A has manipulated the ticketing system. She refuses to relocate to her assigned main cabin seat, and she is acting aggressively toward the crew. I've already called Gate Agent Brenda to coordinate with airport police. We just need your authorization to have her escorted off." David stared at her. For a terrifying second, Cynthia thought he was angry at the passenger. She stood a little taller, feeling the righteous vindication of her authority. "Aggressively?" David repeated, his voice dangerously low. "Yes, Captain. Belligerent and uncooperative," Cynthia lied smoothly. "Cynthia," David said, stepping fully out of the cockpit and into the galley, towering over her. "Hand me your company tablet. And your radio." Cynthia frowned, confusion breaking through her practiced facade. "Captain, I need the tablet for the passenger manifest. Hand them to me, now." The sharpness of his tone left no room for debate. Trembling slightly, Cynthia unclipped the heavy radio from her belt and handed over the iPad. "Stand exactly where you are," David ordered. "Do not speak. Do not move." Without waiting for a response, Captain Harris turned and strode past the forward lavatory, stepping into the ambient purple light of the Global First cabin. The atmosphere in the cabin was thick with tension. The other passengers had stopped pretending to read their complimentary newspapers. All eyes were on the aisle. Richard Sterling, sitting in 2B, was leaning forward, a smug grin plastered across his face. He saw the captain approaching and nodded approvingly. "About time," Richard muttered loudly. "Captain, this young woman is causing a massive delay. She needs to be removed." David completely ignored Richard. He didn't even glance in the executive's direction. Instead, he stopped squarely in front of Suite 2A. Maya was sitting exactly as she had been, calm, composed, her hands resting lightly on the leather armrests. She looked up at the captain, her dark eyes entirely unreadable. She wasn't crying. She wasn't yelling. She was the absolute antithesis of the belligerent passenger Cynthia had just described. David looked at the young woman, recognizing the sharp, intelligent features that mirrored the man whose portrait hung in the executive boardroom in Chicago. "Miss Reynolds," Captain Harris said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent cabin. The use of her name made Cynthia, who had crept to the edge of the galley to watch, suddenly freeze. "Yes, Captain," Maya replied softly. David offered a stiff, formal nod. "I just got off the secure line with your father. He sends his regards, and he apologizes for the unacceptable treatment you've received on his airline tonight." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that sucked the air out of the room. Across the aisle, Richard Sterling's smug grin vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Her father. His airline. In the galley, Cynthia gripped the edge of the metal counter to keep her knees from buckling. The blood drained entirely from her face, leaving her looking sickly and hollow. The realization of what she had just done crashed into her with the force of a physical blow. "I appreciate that, Captain Harris," Maya said, her voice steady, though a flicker of relief finally showed in her eyes. "My seat was supposedly blocked for maintenance. Can you confirm if this aircraft is safe to fly?" "The aircraft is perfectly safe, Miss Reynolds. There are no maintenance issues with Seat 2A. Your ticket is fully valid, paid in full, and you are exactly where you belong," David announced, making sure his voice projected to every corner of the cabin. He then turned slowly on his heel. His gaze swept over Richard Sterling, who physically shrank back into his seat, suddenly deeply interested in the stitching on his Toomey briefcase. Then David's eyes locked onto Cynthia. "Cynthia," Captain Harris called out. "Step into the aisle." Cynthia moved like a condemned prisoner walking to the gallows. Her perfectly ironed uniform suddenly felt like a straitjacket. She stopped a few feet away from the captain, unable to meet Maya's eyes. "Captain, I was just following the information from the gate," Cynthia stammered, her voice shaking violently. The confident, sneering woman from 10 minutes ago was entirely gone. "Brenda said, 'Do not blame the gate agent for your own discriminatory actions,'" David cut her off, his voice echoing with the authority of a man who commanded hundreds of millions of dollars of heavy machinery. "You racially profiled a premium passenger. You fabricated a maintenance issue to cover it up. You lied to my face about her behavior, and you attempted to use airport security as a weapon to enforce your own prejudice." "No, Captain, please, it was a misunderstanding," Cynthia pleaded, tears finally spilling over her heavy mascara. "I've been with Atlantic Global for 18 years. "Then you should know better," David said coldly. "As of this exact second, you are relieved of your duties. You are suspended pending immediate termination. Pack your bags." Gasps erupted from the older couple in row 1. Richard Sterling was perfectly still, terrified that the captain's wrath would turn on him next for egging the flight attendant on. "But who will act as chief purser?" Cynthia cried, desperation clawing at her throat. "The flight will be cancelled. You can't do this right before a transatlantic crossing." "The number 2 flight attendant in the back is fully certified to step up to chief," David replied smoothly. "We will fly with minimum crew requirements if we have to, but you will not be on my airplane. Get your luggage." David didn't wait for her to move. He walked over to the bulkhead wall and unhooked the main PA microphone. He pressed the button to broadcast not just to the plane, but to the external speakers at the gate podium. "Gate Agent Brenda!" Captain Harris's voice boomed through the terminal, loud enough to stop boarding in its tracks. "This is Captain Harris on Flight 882. You are requested on the jet bridge immediately." Less than a minute later, Brenda appeared at the aircraft door. She looked out of breath and incredibly smug, flanked by 2 Port Authority police officers in high-vis vests. She assumed her call for security had been answered. "Captain," Brenda said loudly, stepping onto the plane. "I brought the officers to remove the disruptive passenger in 2A. David walked up to the front door, standing between Brenda and the first-class cabin. "Officers," David said, addressing the police calmly, "thank you for responding so quickly. However, there has been a change of plans. The passenger in 2A is not the problem." Brenda frowned, looking confused. "But she refused to move." "Brenda," David interrupted, his voice laced with absolute finality. "I just received direct orders from the Executive Vice President of Flight Operations, Arthur Reynolds. You specifically targeted his daughter, fabricated a ticketing error, and attempted to illegally deny boarding to a fully ticketed first-class passenger based on her race and appearance." Brenda's jaw dropped. The radio on her hip slipped from her fingers, clattering loudly against the floor of the jet bridge. "Arthur Reynolds," Brenda choked out, the name suffocating her. "Yes," David said. He gestured to Cynthia, who was weeping silently as she dragged her rolling suitcase up the aisle, her uniform jacket draped over her arm. "You and Cynthia are both suspended immediately, pending a full HR investigation and termination. Hand over your airport security badge, Brenda." Brenda stood paralyzed. The 2 Port Authority officers, realizing the situation had completely flipped, exchanged a glance. They weren't there to drag a young black girl off a plane. They were there to escort 2 disgraced airline employees out of the terminal. "Ma'am," one of the officers said, stepping toward Brenda and holding out his hand, "we're going to need your SIDA badge, and we'll need to escort both of you to the non-secure side of the airport." Brenda's hands shook as she unclipped her badge. She looked past the captain, her eyes locking onto Maya, who was watching the entire scene unfold from the comfort of seat 2A. Maya didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just watched as the consequences of their actions dismantled their careers in real time. As Cynthia and Brenda were escorted off the jet bridge by the police, Captain Harris turned back to the first-class cabin. He looked directly at Richard Sterling. "Mr. Sterling," Captain Harris said, his tone icy. Richard jumped in his seat. "Yes, Captain? I assure you, I had nothing to do with this. I was just... If you ever speak to another passenger on my aircraft the way you spoke to Miss Reynolds tonight, I will personally ensure your diamond medallion status is permanently revoked, and you are added to the corporate no-fly list. Do I make myself clear?" "Crystal clear, Captain." Richard swallowed hard, shrinking further into his luxury pod. "My apologies to the young lady." David turned to Maya, his expression softening just a fraction. "Can I get you anything, Miss Reynolds, before we close the doors?" Maya reached into her bag and pulled out her noise-cancelling headphones. She looked at the empty space where Cynthia and Brenda's authority had been absolute just minutes prior. "Just that sparkling water with lemon, Captain," Maya said softly, "whenever the new purser has a moment." The heavy reinforced doors of the Boeing 777 closed with a definitive, mechanical thud, sealing off the cabin from the chaos of the terminal. The air inside Global First Class had completely transformed. The ambient purple lighting felt less like an exclusive club and more like a quiet sanctuary. Moments later, a younger flight attendant named Gwen, who had just been hastily promoted from the main cabin to acting chief purser, approached Suite 2A. She carried a silver tray with a crystal glass of sparkling water, a fresh lemon wedge resting perfectly on the rim. Her hands were visibly shaking, but her smile was genuine. "Your water, miss," Gwen said, her voice soft and deeply respectful. "I cannot express how sorry the rest of the crew is for what just transpired. If you need absolutely anything, a blanket, a different meal, or just to be left alone, please let me know." "Thank you, Gwen," the young engineer replied, offering her first real smile of the evening. "I just want to get to London. You're doing great." As the massive aircraft pushed back from the gate and began its taxi down the JFK runway, the silence in the cabin was broken only by the hum of the massive GE-90 engines. In seat 2B, the executive was living through a localized nightmare. His tailored charcoal suit suddenly felt 2 sizes too small. He spent the entire taxi and takeoff staring rigidly at his personal entertainment screen, too terrified to even glance across the aisle. For years he had operated under the assumption that his diamond medallion status and his corporate title at Aegis Financial made him untouchable. He had actively participated in the bullying of a young black woman because he assumed she had no power. He had assumed wrong. When the seatbelt sign finally chimed off at 30,000 feet, the executive unbuckled his belt and leaned across the aisle. He cleared his throat, a pathetic, raspy sound. "Miss," he whispered, his voice dripping with forced, desperate humility. I want to extend my deepest apologies. I misread the situation earlier. I was stressed about a major acquisition meeting in Canary Wharf tomorrow, and I took it out on you. It was uncalled for." The young woman didn't look up from her iPad, where she was currently reviewing thermal aerodynamic schematics for her MIT presentation. She slowly reached up, tapped the side of her noise-cancelling headphones to pause her music, and finally turned her head. "You didn't misread the situation," she said, her voice a calm, chilling whisper that sliced through his excuses. "You saw an opportunity to punch down, and you took it. You didn't apologize when you thought I was a nobody. You're only apologizing now because you found out my father owns the chessboard. Leave me alone." She tapped her headphones again, resuming her music, and turned back to her screen. The executive physically recoiled, sinking back into his pod. He ordered 3 double whiskies over the course of the 7-hour flight, but the alcohol couldn't drown out the impending sense of doom settling in his stomach. He knew the airline industry. He knew corporate retribution. He was flying directly into a storm of his own making. The rest of the flight was flawless. The crew treated the young engineer with the utmost professional respect, not out of fear, but out of a desperate need to prove that the airline's core values were not represented by the 2 bigots who had just been escorted out of the terminal. She slept peacefully for 4 hours, waking up to a hot espresso and a fresh croissant, just as the sun began to rise over the English coast, painting the clouds in brilliant shades of gold and pink. When Flight 882 finally touched down at London Heathrow, the landing was butter smooth. But for the executive in 2B, the impact was about to shatter his reality. The fallout from Flight 882 was not a slow, gradual decline for those involved. It was an avalanche. It was swift, brutal, and executed with the kind of corporate precision that leaves absolutely no room for survival. While the young engineer, Aliyah, was stepping off the Boeing 777 at London Heathrow, refreshed, vindicated, and preparing to secure full venture capital funding for her aeronautical drone project, the guillotine was already dropping back in the United States. Inside the glass-walled executive suites of Atlantic Global Airways in Chicago, Vice President Reynolds did not wait for the morning news cycle. At 6 a.m. sharp, an emergency disciplinary hearing was convened. The gate agent and the blonde purser sat frozen in leather chairs, flanked by their union representative, who was already sweating through his collar. Vice President Reynolds did not yell. He didn't pound his fists on the mahogany conference table. His absolute, chilling calmness was far more terrifying. He simply slid a thick manila folder across the table. "In this folder," the vice president began, his voice dropping the temperature in the room by 10 degrees, "are the official flight logs, the sworn written testimony of the captain, and a dozen eyewitness accounts from the first-class cabin. You did not just insult a premium passenger. You actively conspired to fabricate a mechanical issue with a multi-million-dollar aircraft to justify your racial profiling. You weaponized airport police to enforce your own bigotry." The union representative cleared his throat, attempting a desperate defense. "Sir, both of these women have decades of unblemished service. This was a high-stress boarding environment. We believe a suspension and mandatory sensitivity training. They are not being suspended," the vice president interrupted smoothly, never breaking eye contact with the weeping purser. "They are terminated, effectively immediately, with cause. Furthermore, because this constitutes a documented civil rights violation and a deliberate falsification of aircraft maintenance logs, Atlantic Global Airways is legally obligated to forward this file to the Federal Aviation Administration and the Department of Transportation." The gate agent let out a choked gasp, burying her face in her hands. "Your secure airport credentials are permanently revoked," the vice president finalized, standing up from the table. "You will lose your pensions, and because the FAA will flag your files, you will never work in the commercial aviation sector ever again. Not as flight attendants, not as gate agents, not even scanning bags. You are entirely done." They were escorted out of the corporate headquarters by armed security, carrying their belongings in cardboard boxes, their decades-long careers evaporating into the cold Chicago wind. But karma was just getting started. 3,000 miles away, in the damp, grey morning of London, Mr. Pierce, the arrogant executive from Seat 2B, stepped out of a black executive cab in the financial district of Canary Wharf. He adjusted his tailored lapels, gripped his luxury leather briefcase, and took a deep breath. He had convinced himself during the flight that the incident on the plane was an isolated bubble. The captain had yelled at him, sure, but he was a senior managing partner at a global investment firm. He was untouchable in the real world. He walked into the towering glass lobby of his firm's European headquarters, flashed a charismatic smile at the front desk, and swiped his corporate ID badge at the security turnstiles. Beep, beep, beep. The LED screen on the turnstile flashed a harsh, glaring crimson. Access denied. Mr. Pierce frowned, tapping the badge against the reader again. The same red flash. The same denial. Before he could wave down a security guard, his custom ringtone echoed from his pocket. He pulled out his phone. The caller ID made his stomach drop into his designer shoes. It was the global CEO of his firm, calling directly from Wall Street. "Good morning, sir," Pierce answered, trying to inject his usual aggressive confidence into his voice. "I'm just arriving at Canary Wharf for the merger. You are not attending the merger meeting, Pierce." The CEO's voice snapped through the speaker, radiating pure, unfiltered rage. "In fact, you need to turn around, walk out of that lobby, and wait for a courier to bring you a severance package. You are fired." Pierce physically staggered backward, bumping into a marble pillar. "What?" "Sir, there has to be a mistake. Our quarterly earnings are—" "This has nothing to do with earnings," the CEO roared. "Have you looked at the internet this morning? Have you checked X? Have you looked at the front page of the major aviation blogs?" Pierce's hands began to shake violently. He pulled the phone away from his ear just enough to put it on speaker, quickly swiping open his web browser. The nightmare was fully digitized. During the standoff in the first-class cabin, a passenger in row 1 had discreetly pulled out his smartphone and recorded the entire audio of the captain's blistering dressing down of the flight crew, perfectly capturing the captain, turning his wrath onto the executive in 2B. The audio had been leaked online while Pierce was asleep over the Atlantic. It had gone viral with devastating speed. At Aero Watchdog, listen to this Atlantic global captain absolutely destroy a racist flight crew and an entitled finance bro who tried to kick a black female engineer out of first class. Hashtag first class bigot. Hashtag karma. The internet is undefeated when it comes to identifying people who assume they are anonymous. Within 3 hours of the audio going live, sleuths had matched the flight manifest to corporate travel records. They found his LinkedIn. They found his corporate biography. The comments were a tidal wave of public execution. "We spend $50 million a year on inclusive marketing and ESG compliance, Pierce," the COO hissed through the phone. "And you destroyed our entire corporate image in a 5-minute temper tantrum because you couldn't stand sitting next to a young woman in a hoodie. Your corporate credit cards are frozen. Your company phone will be bricked in 10 minutes. Do not ever contact this firm again." The line went dead. Stranded in the lobby of a building he no longer had access to, thousands of miles from home, Pierce was entirely unmoored. The arrogance that had fueled him for 20 years drained away, leaving behind a hollow, terrified shell of a man. He needed to get home. He needed to get back to New York to hire a crisis PR firm, to stop his wife from seeing the news, to salvage whatever fragments of his life were left. With trembling fingers, he opened the Atlantic Global Airways app on his phone to book the next flight out of Heathrow. He was a Diamond Medallion member. He had 3 million lifetime flight miles. He usually just tapped a button, and a first-class pod was waiting for him. The app loaded slowly, the spinning blue circle mocking his rising panic. When the home screen finally appeared, there was no greeting. There were no upcoming flights. Instead, a stark, unclosable red banner dominated the entire screen. Account suspended. Diamond Medallion status revoked. Beneath the banner, his mileage balance, which had taken a decade of grueling travel to accumulate, read 0 miles. No. No, 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 Pierce muttered frantically, tapping the screen as if striking the glass would fix his life. He found the Elite Priority customer service number and dialed it. Atlantic Global Elite Desk. This is Representative 442, a polite voice answered. Listen to me, Pierce demanded, his voice cracking with desperation. My app is glitching. It says my account is suspended. I am a Diamond Medallion member. I need a seat on the 11 a.m. flight to JFK immediately. There was a long pause on the line. The sound of rapid typing echoed through the earpiece. Sir, can you verify your name and date of birth? Pierce rattled off the information. Another agonizing pause followed. Mr. Pierce, the representative's voice shifted, dropping all pretense of customer service warmth. I am reading a legal flag on your profile, entered by the Executive Vice President of Flight Operations. Due to abusive, discriminatory, and disruptive behavior toward fellow passengers on Flight 882, Atlantic Global Airways has terminated your loyalty account. Furthermore, you have been permanently added to our corporate no-fly list. You can't do that, Pierce screamed, drawing the attention of the London security guards. I fly hundreds of thousands of miles with you. I am a premium customer. You are no longer a customer at all, sir. You are banned from flying on Atlantic Global, as well as all of our international alliance partners. If you attempt to purchase a ticket or enter our terminal, airport police will arrest you for trespassing. Have a day. The representative hung up. Pierce stood in the rain outside Canary Wharf, fully realizing the magnitude of his ruin. The young woman he had sneered at, the woman he had tried to humiliate for his own amusement, hadn't just taken her rightful seat. She had inadvertently grounded his entire existence, with his corporate cards frozen and his premium airline access vaporized. Pierce had to walk in the pouring rain to a discount electronics store just to buy a cheap burner laptop. He spent hours navigating the clunky, ad-filled websites of ultra-low-cost, budget airlines. He had to use his personal debit card, watching his own checking account drain to secure a last-minute, one-way ticket. 12 hours later, the former senior managing partner found himself standing in the chaotic, un-air-conditioned terminal of a budget carrier. There was no priority lane. There was no lounge with free champagne. He stood in a massive, sweaty line for 2 hours, getting bumped and jostled by backpackers. When he finally boarded the aging, rattling aircraft, he was directed to the very last row. Seat 42E, the dreaded middle seat, directly in front of the lavatory, which didn't even recline. He had to pay a $60 penalty fee at the gate just to bring his luxury leather briefcase on board, which he now had to shove under the seat in front of him, eliminating whatever legroom he had left. As the budget plane hit severe turbulence over the Atlantic, Pierce sat crammed between a teenager blasting music through leaky headphones and a man eating a pungent egg salad sandwich. Every time the lavatory door opened, the chemical smell of cheap disinfectant wafted over him. His knees pressed painfully against the hard plastic of the tray table. He closed his eyes, the roar of the engines giving him a blinding headache, and realized the ultimate, undeniable truth about karma. It is ruthlessly efficient. He had demanded that a brilliant young woman be sent to the back of the plane where he believed she belonged. And now, stripped of his title, his miles, and his dignity, the universe had ensured he ended up exactly where he belonged. Privilege often operates under the assumption that it is invisible and bulletproof, but true character is revealed when that privilege is challenged. This story proves that prejudice and entitlement are not just moral failings. They are massive liabilities that will eventually collapse under the weight of their own arrogance. The gate agent, the flight attendant, and the executive all looked at a young, brilliant black woman and saw a target. They didn't realize they were staring at a mirror that would reflect their ugliest traits back to the world, costing them their careers and their dignity. Karma doesn't always wait for the next lifetime. Sometimes it meets you right on the jet bridge.